Welcome everyone to the very last day of this year's International Literature Festival, and what a better way what a better way to end it than with a acclaimed author, poet, philosopher, playwright, Claudia Rankine. Please welcome her. We're going to have a conversation about a book called An American Conversation, Just Us. It's the last book that was published, 2020. And before I go into the book and before I go into introducing Claudia Rankine a little bit more to you, I want to invite you to have a conversation with us as well, not in the usual format as to like us speaking for an hour and then we have no more time for questions, but I want to open it up somewhere in the middle after we've chatted a little bit, and we have two colleagues of this festival who have microphones so that more or less in the middle of our talk you can join the conversation if you want to, if you have pressing questions or comments about what we already talked about. I want to greet everyone who came here in person and also everyone who is watching live right now. This is one of the actually quite many talks of the International Literature Festival that are recorded, not only live now, but also can be seen on YouTube. So if you've missed some of the great talks of the last 10 days, you can go on the YouTube channel of the International Literature Festival and go back to something that has been discussed here before. Claudia Rankine, the last time you were sitting here on the stage was with Margaret Atwood. I'm a little bit shy now because I'm not her, but still we're going to manage with your help as well. I want to introduce you a little bit. As I said, you're a poet, an author, a playwright. I would say a cultural and social thinker. I would say an activist as well. I mean, editor is definitely true. What do you think about the term activist?
It's not one I would engage myself, but it depends on how you think about activism. I think I am a believer in the importance of culture, and every storyteller is in a way offering an ideology to their readers, and that ideology is either in support of, let's just say, I'm talking specifically about the US right now, in support of a white-centric patriarchy or not. And so in that way, I think any work that you do that pushes against ideas that white people are in a position of power naturally is a form of activism for any writer who is writing.
You were born in Kingston in Jamaica. You and your family emigrated, I think you were 7 or 6 to the USA. I was also wondering about this point, like I told you before, I'd like to have a conversation also about biography, because I always think it's boring for me and you, for me to recite your life, because you know it quite well, I think. Is it, it's the part I hate about these things, it's like, oh, this is your life. Do you think it's important that, you know, to mention that you came from Jamaica and that your family is one of IMI or emigration, I wonder?
It's a great question, because I think there are two ways of looking at it. I think that as an American citizen, sometimes bringing up the idea of a person coming from another place into the dominant culture is a way of othering them. But in this case, so it's not, you know, sometimes it's just like, oh, she's from Jamaica where they have reggae music, so you know her. There's Bob Marley, and now there's her. But I think when you are interested in extending the understanding of a writer's work relative to issues around post-colonial histories, legacies, then I think it's really important that one has a different orientation informing their citizenship.
Moving on, you studied at the Williams College in Massachusetts and the Columbia University in New York. Your debut in poetry was Nothing in Nature is Private in 1994. All in all, you've published, it's not 5, it's actually 6 volumes of poetry in 4 plays. Some of them are The Help, The White Card, Provenance of Beauty, South Bronx Travelogue. I'm curious to know how the poetry informs your plays and vice versa. Yeah, maybe let me ask you that now.
Mm-hmm. The poetry informing the plays. Somebody said, and I sort of love this, that playwrights are poets who got lonely. And that is the experience, actually, because as a poet, you're working on your own mostly. And suddenly you go into the act of theater making and you are in one of the most collaborative endeavors. And so I love it as a point of company creation. And the thing that you make, even though as the writer your name is on it, is actually the work of a number of people working at their best. So the collaborator, the director, everybody, the choreographer. So everyone is in that room every day, just pushing a thing forward. And if you have the chance to be involved in something like that, I say go, because it really is incredible to have to gel with that many people in order to get the thing that you want to make out there.
Mm-hmm. The next publication in that line of thought or in your biography is Don't Let Me Be Lonely. You can also purchase it here at this bookstand by Dussmann. Lass mich nicht einsam sein was the last work by you, translated in German by the Spectre Publishing House, translated by Uta Strätling. Then very well known, I think most of you will know it, Citizen, an American lyric, was also translated into German, published in 2014. Became a New York bestseller immediately and was a finalist in the National Book Award. And then eventually Just Us, an American Conversation was published in 2020. You told me beforehand that it's also connected to, well, one chapter of it is also connected to the play Help, and we might, instead of her reading something, just decided 10 minutes ago that we were going to perform something, which is going to be exciting. Tell us a little bit about what I have to expect and the audience has to expect.
Well, Help, the play Help and the book Just Us came out of an article I wrote for the New York Times. And that article began because I was teaching a class at Yale called The Construction of Whiteness. And my students, for their final projects, they all decided that they wanted to interview people and talk to them about whiteness, like their parents, for example. They had grown up in households where the parent had never actually expressed the fact that the child is white and they themselves are white. And that thing, whiteness, was constructed in order to push white people ahead of others in terms of colonialism, et cetera, et cetera. So they were interviewing parents, they were interviewing grandparents, they were interviewing roommates, they were interviewing people on the street. And I thought, well, who do I not speak to normally? And even though my husband is white, and some of our friends are white men, I don't normally fall into conversations with white men I don't know. So, if I'm sitting around, there might be another woman, she could be white, she could be anything, she'd be, I like your shoes. That's a nice coat. Oh, are you going And then a conversation starts. But never have I said to a white man in an airport, or, I like your shoes. That's a nice coat. I mean, part of it is because of, gender issues. And it's like, no, I am not picking anybody up right now. So I decided that we were in a political situation where Donald Trump was running for president. I'm laughing because it's laughable. And it wasn't just him, you know, he was galvanizing a side of pushback against Obama's presidency that was leaning radically to the right. And when he ran, got, I think, I forget the percentage, but it was in the 60s or 70s, support of white men in the United States. It was a lot of white men had voted for this person. And not him, but his agenda. Xenophobic, sexist, everything that you can think of that might be questionable. And so I decided I would ask these guys, why'd you vote for him? And, or did you vote for him? Or what do you think about the fact that you're white and you're male and you have inherent privilege in a society where you will not replace us, Jews will not replace us? It's being chanted by white men as if they were not in all the positions of power. Supreme Court, Senate, House, CEOs, everywhere. So that was how it began. It was a conscious decision. I spent a lot of time traveling, giving talks, doing whatever, on airplanes. And so I thought, you know, my dead time is actually in airport lobbies and on planes. So why not use that time? Often I'm the only black woman in first class, and I'm sitting next to some white guy. They want to make conversation about I don't know what, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about the fact that you're white, and I'm not. And so that led to the New York Times piece, which had over 1,000 responses and 200 letters to me, personally. Dear Professor Rankine, this is what you got wrong in your article. Or, you really want to talk to a white man? Call me. Here is my number.
Just to clarify, you just said you were asking a white man about why they voted for Trump, but you actually asked them if they're aware of their white privilege, right? Mm-hmm. Or did you ask them both?
Mostly, I started with the idea of white privilege. Mm-hmm. Occasionally, I had one guy who said to me, "I love taking airplanes." It's actually in the play. He said, "I love taking airplanes. It's no phones, no news. I can't stand the news. It's just every day. I can't stand it." And I said, "Well, you shouldn't have voted for him." And he said to me, "How do you know who I voted for?" So I was like, "Tell me you didn't vote for him." He didn't speak to me after that. It was the end of our conversation.
It's not the end of this conversation, luckily. I just want to go back to, like, I'm still not done with your biography, but I like the way that we're breaking everything up. No, that's how I like it, actually. As Citizen, American Lyric was, as the ILB biography says, an exploration of the individual and collective effects on racism on U.S. society, whereas the book we talk about now is hard to figure out if there is one topic, but whiteness or the construction of whiteness or white privilege, I would say, is the overall arch of that. Now, looking at the time that American Citizen, American Lyric was written is before Trump. Can you say something about the time in which you wrote that? Was that the Obama years in which you wrote it?
When I wrote Citizen, it was during Trump. I mean, not Trump, Bush.
Bush and Obama.
Yeah, before, so Bush preceded Obama.
Mm-hmm.
And and then it went into the Obama years. But it began during Katrina. I don't know if you remember, there was the storm. It displaced so many African Americans, killed a number of them. And I really got irritated by white people saying to me, how could this happen in America? I'm like, you're racist, the structure is racist, and you're asking me why African Americans were abandoned by the government in America? Where have you been all of your life? And that's how it started, because it was one of those first times where I'm like, these people, and I will say this, I am surrounded by incredibly privileged people because I myself am privileged. And so we're talking about incredibly educated, prize-winning people who refuse to talk about, think about the way in which whiteness was constructed and is privileged in the United States. And so then they make statements like that. How could this happen? Like, you voted for this.
Mm-hmm.
Am I a downer, Debbie Downer?
No. Just let me finish this, just to give the audience a little bit an idea of the awards you also got. I mean, I just talked about Just Us, which we're going to talk about more. You're a member of the Academy of American Poets since 2005. Among the many awards that can be checked on claudiarankine.com. Also, if you want to see all of them, is the Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry and the Jackson Poetry Prize. You were a fellow of the Guggenheim Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation. You held the Frederick Eisman Professorship in Poetry at the Yale University until last year, I think, and are now teaching creative writing, the MFA program at the New York University. You're also the co-founder of the Interdisciplinary Racial Imaginary Institute. And this is another question I have. Tell us a little bit, maybe shortly, about the Interdisciplinary Racial Imaginary Institute that I think you co-founded with your husband, right?
Well, he is a member, but well, he is a member.
I thought it was your husband laughing. Is he in the audience?
Yeah,
No.
he is in the audience.
Is it? Show yourself. It's like, who dares to laugh?
But the Racial Imaginary Institute it was a long story about why it came about, but I won't give you the whole story, but it was not pretty. It was a moment when I was teaching in Houston with a white male colleague who wrote poetry that was actually racist. And as a colleague, I didn't feel like I could say anything. You know, it's like, he's my colleague. I'm not here to get involved with that. But my students one day said to me, how is he allowed to write this? And so I said to him, look, do you want to come to my class and talk to my students about your intention in terms of talking about, these were poems that talked about Serena Williams and Venus Williams basically as animals. And I said, do you want, you know, full disclosure, they think it's racist. Come. He said, sure, I'll come. And he came. And he began the discussion by saying, these poems were written for white people. We don't need to, and you have no business questioning me. And at that point I thought, oh, this is not going well. But then it escalated and escalated and escalated. And in the class was one black female student, and that student said to him, if I were to write something and say, I'm only writing it for black people. How would that be received in your class? And he yelled at her. He said, don't talk to me. Don't ask me questions. Who the hell do you think you are? So years pass, and life is funny, and she publishes a book with his publisher in the same year that he publishes a book. And they have a reading together. So this young writer and then this very senior white male writer. And before she reads, and he gets up and he reads a poem he has written that says, black women in their tight dresses, something I'm making loose of this, but something like this, walking across the stage to collect awards that they don't deserve. So he reads this thing, and then she's the next person to read. And so the student calls me, and she says, can you believe this? My book has just been published, and he has done this. And I say, don't do anything. She said, I have to say something. And I said, don't say anything, but I will say something. Because this is your first book. It's a great achievement. You should be marveling in that. This other shit is not your responsibility. And then a little while after that, I was asked to give a keynote. And in that keynote, I wrote a thing that said, we need to start talking about race. And I pointed specifically to what he had written. And all hell broke loose. People were like, how dare you? How dare you, Claudia Rankine? How dare you? And that's when I was thinking, as a culture, we have no practice actually talking about the construction that is under everything that happens in this country. It's at the beginning of the formation of this country, slavery, and it has stayed with us up until tomorrow, and we have no practice talking about it. And so the Racial Imaginary Institute was an attempt to, and this is where my husband comes in, we all got together, and we decided to form a curatorial team where we would put on events, have seminars, where race, whiteness, the construction of whiteness got discussed. We were all always talking about black people, poor black people, but it was racism without racists. Nobody was talking about how the black person arrived where they arrived. And why it was as if we arrived on the shores of Virginia having swum out there and suddenly found ourselves working on plantations. Nobody wanted to talk about how and who was responsible. So that was the beginning.
Maybe a good moment to jump right into the book, actually.
Yes, I left my copy somewhere back there, but okay.
Do you want this one or do you want mine?
I'll take this one.
Okay, good. I see it less as a book than as a sort of an artwork. Or as an archive. It consists of 20 or 21 essays or poems that are all connected to whiteness or the construction of whiteness. And it's quite an amazing journey because, it's my opinion, you can just debate that, but it's political and sociological and philosophical at the same time, but it's never just one thing. It's a train of thought. in a sense, and maybe we can have the slides that I prepared, vielleicht können wir ganz kurz die Dias oder beziehungsweise die PDFs, die ich euch geschickt hatte, zeigen. We would see both sides of the book. Yeah, this is just one example of how the book is structured, and that's why I call it. It's difficult to call a book about sort of like white supremacy beautiful, but there is a beauty in the way that it's arranged, or its format, or its layout. So we always have the left side that either has an image or a fact check, or a train of thought, so to speak. And on the right side, we see your thoughts as I said, philosophical, very personal ideas or thoughts that always strive a certain kind of, I would say, discipline. You could read it academically, but also personally. And if you want to, you can sort of fact check and go deeper into the footnotes that are, in your case, side notes or images. And so it opens up such a space for thought that I, before talking to you now, which is my great privilege, had a conversation with myself, or also with the author of that. And so I think, the effort to have a form like this is like an achievement in itself, without talking about the content. Yeah, you're welcome. But just it's just really an extraordinary effort and an extraordinary content and form-wise. We see here Elizabeth Eckford, I think. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is one of the images that I corresponded with, because I knew it. I had to Google. She was one of the 9 people on the 23rd September of 1957 who were admitted to Little Rock. I think many of you might know this, at the time of sort of like the end of segregation in the school system of the US. This is not necessarily, the images that you show are not necessarily always, directly intertwined. Mostly we have a little red dot on your text that tells us where to connect. Maybe we can have the next slide, please. Something like this. You sometimes integrate also, this is, I think, a screenshot of a Facebook, racist Facebook slur, together with some kind of explanations. This goes into the horrible, you just alluded to it, comparison of black people to apes, I think. Let me check.
Yeah, this was with the birth of Prince, the one who is not who has left the royal family.
Who?
Yes, Meghan and Marshall. Yeah. I don't follow them very well.
Me neither. I'm not big on the royals either. I'm sorry.
But when the child was born, this was put out by one of the journalists, and then a big kerfuffle about whether or not it was racist. Excuse me.
Yeah. And just as a little guideline, we see a red dot here, and then the sentence that you quote from is always quoted there, and some background information is given. Maybe the next slide, please. We have demographics here, for example, in the very beginning. Demographics of political power. Next slide, please, just to show you the differences of a layout. And then we have, I think it's Jefferson's Notes on the State of Virginia. Can you tell us, this is a part of the book that is just the images, or like copies of that declaration, or whatever it is? Tell us a little bit about the idea of going back in history and having these notes included in your artist's book or book. Yeah.
Well, Thomas Jefferson also, he is the best we have. And he really is. He's a very complicated guy who is not in support of slavery, but had slaves, had to keep them because they were part of his mortgage situation at Monticello. So, life's complicated. But in Notes to Virginia, he says some of the most racist things, but also some of the most true things. He says that this difficulty between white people and black people will never end, because once black people realize what white people have done to them, there will be no end to this. So I'm actually, I have a great fondness for Jefferson, for being able to be complicated, racist, but also telling the truth. Saying what it is he sees before him, and also saying his own self-interest overrides whatever he might believe morally.
Do we have another? I think we have another slide or two even. And then we have images like this. Sometimes I would have, I was wondering, I had to Google, although your book is an archive where I can get the background information, sometimes there aren't informations given. So of course, Black Lives Matter was, by some people, also black politicians, weirdly, Ben Carson and others, was countered with the idea that Black Lives Matter, Trump said that is in itself decisive and racist, and so we should say all lives matter. I think Blue Lives Matter was a thing, and now out of this was erased the V of the lives. Can you tell us a little bit about where you found this, or what that particular all lives matter image means to you? Should it speak for itself, or is there some explanation you can give?
Well, it's an artwork by Hank Willis Thomas, I think his name is, and he, it's really quite clever because if you are in the presence of the actual piece, you see the V depending on where you're standing. So you're always shifting between lies and lives, visually. He's also I don't know if you remember that Nike symbol on the side of someone's head. He's responsible for that. He does really amazing art with advertisements and social archival things that are produced by the society. And he has a show opening right now, actually, maybe even this week in New York at Jack Shaman Gallery.
Yeah, let's see if we have another one. Oh yeah, that's something I wanted to ask you about. Since a lot of it, is about male privilege, we have historical pictures of, was it Georgia or somewhere in Eastern Europe, where with burning swastikas. That's not from the Nazi regime, but a couple of years ago. And then this image of a man just saying, "I'm not ashamed or afraid to be white." What's the context of that? Where did you find that picture? Was it just so should it also stand for itself, or?
Many of the images of photos of white supremacists in the book were taken by Mark Peterson, but this one, I want to get his name correctly, so Hank Willis Thomas did the other one, All Lives Matter. This is Michael.
Is Mark Peterson?
No, this one is Michael, I think. Oh. Michael David Murphy, and is this also Mark Peterson? What page is this?
This is 140, and it says here from me, it says Mark Peterson.
Oh, so this is also Mark Peterson. Okay. And Mark Peterson, Michael Murphy's photo is the one where the white man is standing on the plinth.
Oh, yeah.
That one. But this Mark Peterson is an incredible photographer, and he has followed white supremacist groups in the United States. And I think as a white guy, he can sort of just fold in, so he doesn't bring a lot of attention to himself. And he's able to photograph them in meetings, in public demonstrations, and he has an incredible archive. So for people who don't believe that white men in our American government are also part of these cells that were activated January 6th for the insurrection, you just have to look at his work. You can also go to the FBI because they are telling us that there are cells, white supremacist cells, and they were totally on the rise during Trump's administration because he refused to designate them as terrorist groups.
Let's see if we have another one, because I don't want this to be our background for the end of the conversation. That's also, well, which one would you choose for keeping?
Well, let's keep her.
Let's keep her. Let's keep Elizabeth Eckford.
Okay.
we should read something and then maybe allow the first round of questions if you have any. Should we do the?
Yeah, let's do it.
You have to explain also to me a little bit what we're doing right now, because the first part of this book is called Liminal Spaces 1. There are 3 liminal spaces in the book. It was the one, as you said, that was also published in the New York Times, the one that you got so much feedback from, but you also put it into a play with a narrator and white men 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Exactly.
And that play is called Help, and we're going to try and perform it, a bit of it for you.
I wouldn't call it, let's not go so far as saying perform, but, but we will read a section. It's Act 2, Scene 4. And the scene, the narrator, literally these conversations came out of the actual conversations I had. And I tried to stay honest in terms of what they said and what I said. And so this guy, narrator 4, I sent him this conversation. Because we talked on the plane. When we got off the plane, he said, I'm going to get your books. And apparently he did, and he wrote me, because you can just find out where I teach, and he wrote to me and said he had read the books. He's a CEO at a company. And I said, well, I want you to know that this conversation we had on the plane is going to be in a piece that is in the New York Times. And I liked him, so I didn't want him to open the paper and see it. So I said, are you okay with this? And does this conversation actually reflect your memory of what was said between us? And he said, yes. And I said, if you can have the time and feel like it, if you would write a response, we will also include that. And he did. And I love this guy because, when somebody sends you an email, you can see when they wrote it. So, he's the CEO of a company, he has 2 small kids. I've learned a lot about him. And but he wrote the response at like 2:38 in the morning. And I thought, he tried to fit it in. He made it work. So this is what we are going to be reading now.
There's a singing part, but you do this, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know the song.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. It's another flight, and I'm sitting next to another white man, and somehow our conversation has the ease of kicking a ball around on a fall afternoon. Or it feels like stepping out the door in the spring when suddenly the temperature inside and out reads the same on your skin. Resistance falls away, your shoulders relax. I am metaphorically, happily outdoors with this man.
Who's your favorite musician?
The Commodores, because of one song, Night Shift.
I love Springsteen, but Night Shift is one of my favorite songs.
I still can hear him say, does anyone know that Night Shift, that song? Talk to me so you can see what's going on. I cannot sing, okay. When he asked if I loved Springsteen's Hungry Heart, I could only think of American Skin, 41 shots. No secret, my friend, you can get killed just for living in your American skin. Why was that song in my head? Is this a problem? Had I made the problem, or was I given the problem? We talked about anything and everything. His father was an academic, his mother was a great woman. He grew up and went through the public school system of a middle-class suburb in the Northeast, a great high school, everyone got along, he loved college. Now he's a CEO. Eventually he told me he'd been working on diversity inside his company.
We still have a long way to go.
He repeated himself.
We still have a long way to go. I don't see color.
This is a statement used by well-meaning white people for whom little black children and little white children are judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
I don't see color.
Pulled an emergency brake in my brain. Would you be bringing up diversity if you didn't see color? Will you tell your wife you had a nice talk with a woman or a black woman? Help. I asked the question slowly, as if testing the air quality. Did he get the rift on Sojourner Truth? Or did he think the ungrammatical construction was a sign of blackness? Aren't you a white man? Can't you see that? Because if you can't see race, you can't see racism.
I get it. What other inane things have I said?
Only that. I didn't let the reality he insisted on represent my reality. And I was pleased that I hadn't lubricated the moment. Pleased I could say no to the silence and mechanisms of manners.
Pleased I didn't need to open up a vein of complaint. Pleased I was not passively bullying.
I was pleased I could carry the disturbance of my reality.
I thought a lot about our conversation since the flight. I realized that I misrepresented what I said about my hometown. I don't know why. I certainly hadn't done it intentionally. I believed I was being honest in the moment, but after our talk, it was evident. I said I didn't notice much tension between the black kids and the white kids in our town. I guess it's not that I didn't notice it so much as I wanted to forget it, because thinking back, tensions were everywhere. Maybe it was such a constant in our lives that I didn't think about it, except for the overtly ugly incidents, like the time the white kid who sat in front of me in freshman algebra turned around and asked if I were planning to go to the varsity basketball game that night to watch the N-words play. I remember only a couple of physical fights between black kids and white kids, but cruelty, mostly from white to black, was always only a comment away. Thinking back, it was all around us. It's interesting that our conversation made me realize it.
So that's the scene, but that last bit is what he wrote to me, because on the flight he had said, "Oh, you know, race. I grew up where I grew up. It was never a problem." And then when he wrote the response, he said, it just occurred to him that he had just made that up. And then the question is, why? Why do white people want to insist that there are no issues? What is that? What is, the discomfort of the reality is unbearable because you understand the terms under which you've been living.
You quote Robin DiAngelo in White Fragility, I think, with that, if you can't see race, you can't see racism, which I find such a crucial part of that conversation. And before I go on asking or talking, maybe we can light the room a little bit and see if there are hands in the air who want to take my offer of having the conversation right now, or if not, we can, there's already one in the very back. Thank you very much. Might take a small moment. Make yourself visible, please, to us.
Hi, thank you very much for, I'll stand up so you can see me. Thank you very much for this wonderful talk that I'm enjoying a lot. I was just thinking when you talked about your ex-colleague who claimed that he's writing for a white audience or white people, just to move away from that, I was just wondering if you have, not in terms of race, but in general, do you have a reader in mind when you're writing, for example, your essays? Thank you very much.
I don't, actually. I mean, I've always felt that the work will find its people. I have had the kind of career, the plays always get terrible reviews, for example. The New York Times, when Help was produced in New York, the review in the New York Times said, "Why do we have to see this play? White people already read the books." What kind of review is that? I mean, it's very bizarre. But the work seems to throw people off, so then they throw it away. But the play, many people came to see the play, so it didn't matter. So I don't know who the reader will be. I don't have a reader in mind. And I learned that lesson young, because I remember when I wrote my second book, I was invited to give a reading in Michigan. And I thought, why? It was in Saginaw, Michigan. You know, I was like, why am I here? Even getting there was traumatic. I'm on the plane. A white family gets on. The child comes to the row. They're sitting in the same row as me. The child says, "These are our seats, but this is not what I imagined." And the mother says, "It's okay, you can sit over here on the end." So this was how I arrived at that reading in Saginaw, Michigan. And so I'm like, why am I here? And then I got to the event, and a little old lady with blue hair came with the book in a plastic bag, and she said, "I heard you on NPR, and I told them they have to bring you here." So you don't know. So I don't have a reader in mind.
Are there more questions for now or comments for now? There's one over here, I see. Till the microphone comes to you. It's here. Can you stand up maybe so that my colleagues can see you?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so maybe not related to just us, but in general, when I'm reading your books, when I read Citizen, for instance, I felt that the pictures you've used and the text, the combination of those, it felt like a conversation between the text and the image. And oftentimes the image, when it was placed in the end, felt like a punchline that even emphasized the theme that you were talking about even more. And I was really curious about the process of you picking the images and like how the order is. Is it like different each time that you're writing and then you're looking for images, or are you seeing an image and then you want to write about it, get inspired by it? Yeah.
It's probably all those things. There is a database. I have this image of my brain as being a hallway where, things are in their flat files. And then when I need them, they open up. But in reality, what happens more often than not, my husband might show me an image, and I don't know why I will need it, but I know I might need it, and so I'll ask him to store it somewhere. Or I will see something, and I will take a picture, and it's on my phone. And when that happens, I don't know. I really have no idea what I am attracted to in the image exactly, because sometimes it's not about content, it's about affect. There's something being communicated that hits me on some level that has to do not just with what's happening, because content is sometimes often the least important thing, but the affect of it, the emotional resonance, yeah. It's like, yes, you're going to need that. And so then I store it. And then it could be 5 years, it could be, 10 years later that I pull it out. The sort of the text comes to it. It's rare that I have, but it's rare that I go looking for an image. But the conversation is a fluid one between the visual world and the written world.
Thank you so much for asking that question, because I just talked about this format here being a little bit different as in Citizen. There are also images included, but I completely forgot to ask a question about this left-right side format of yours. Was that the strict idea in the beginning, that you would always either keep this side blank, would add an image, or would give some extra facts or some fact-checking to it, or did that come later, and what did the publishers think about that?
Well, the use of the verso recto side of the page, I really wanted the book, Just Us, to perform thinking. You know, when we say something, we say it because we have something in mind. And what we say might not be right, might not be true, but we think it's true because we're pulling on that image. And when oftentimes, you know, we talk a lot about Americans being in a civil war where white people don't understand black people and they have a different lexicon. I've heard people say that. But I wanted the book to enact my referential life even as the text is going, so that when you read the book, you don't think this is the only way to do it. You think, what am I thinking when I hear this? And then you go to your own visual references. And so the book opens out as a process, not as a history book.
Mm-hmm. And it also gives you the great chance to either let you talk in that sense. If I see you as a person, it's just like, no, I want to hear the end of it. Or I can say, put a pin on that, and then I can read the background information. So it's like, my choice was to just read your text fully. Of course, you're sometimes looking at the left page, but I'm not done with that book. It's something that makes me so happy, because I want to go back to certain things and then, read the fact-checking or research some of the images, which is an ongoing conversation. So I think if that was your intention, you succeeded beautifully with it.
If I could just make things happen, it would be great if everybody made their own Just Us. You know, that you had a kind of encyclopedia of what your references are. You know, like I gave a talk to a psychoanalytic institute, and then some very racist things were said in the room by analysts who are, with patients. I'm like, oh my God. And you're helping people. And at a certain point, things got out of hand, and one of the analysts said, I don't know why people are saying the things that they say, because, when I see a black person, I feel afraid. I think they're scary, but then when I talk to them, they're really nice. And, and I would love to know sort of what the referential material is in her head that leads her, an established, well-known therapist, to publicly make a statement like that. So that's why I would be very interested if people were able to create their own Just Us.
Is there another immediate comment here? Yeah, third row, and then maybe we can chat a little bit more on stage, and then fourth row, actually. Invite you again to the conversation.
Hi,
Hi.
I find your work deeply painful, and I'm hardly ever able to make it through just because it wounds me, but it doesn't wound me itself. It just reveals to me all the ways in which the world has wounded me. And I say that as a queer person and a black person and a person from the global south who's neurodivergent, that there's consistently some space that's transphobic or homophobic or racist or sexist or misogynist in some way. And it makes me really feel like there's actually no space in this world for me with all my identities. But in your work, I do find somebody who is a companion, because you were deeply wounded by the things that happen in the books that you offer to us. And yet you still find space and time to go on and to laugh and to joke and to make merry. And I find that really remarkable. And I guess I wonder sometimes when I read your work how I can hold the reality of the world in which we live and still get up and go to work in the morning, knowing that I'm going to have to stuff it all down and contain it within my skin and breathe through it and let it pass. And I just wonder if you have any guidance.
Thank you. Guidance I don't got, but but I will tell you that I trained myself to respond in real time. And it took a little while. Because something happens, somebody says something, and then you go home and you're lying in bed and you're like, why didn't I say? And you think about it. And then the next time somebody says something and you don't go home, you just stand there and you're thinking about saying something. And then eventually I just was like, do it, just say it. Say it in real time. And now I'm very real time-ish, pretty much. Some days I'm floored, but mostly I can say things in real time. And that has helped enormously because I don't carry it with me, I give it back. And like, you just said this thing, you deal with it. Because in fact, it has nothing to do with me. And if it took a little while, so it's not something you just do, because we are such a repressed culture, and we have been told that to respond is impolite, it's rude. I'm like, no, what they said to me was impolite and rude. Responding to it is not impolite and rude. And it means that everybody looks at you, I'm like, they should look. And so, but it took, I had home training like everybody else, and you're not supposed to be confrontational, et cetera, et cetera. But if that means that you're taking it and having to hold your own dehumanization, how can that be the right thing? So it was just, and also hundreds of dollars of therapy. With, the therapist saying, well, why don't you just say? But the next time something happens, it's not a dramatic thing to just respond. And you'll feel the release of that. Because it's outrageous that people have been able to treat people they have decided don't deserve the category of human in public the way they do, and that we take it. And at some point, we have to be responsible for taking it. So that is my 2 cents.
Thank you very much for that question. I wanted to bring in the idea that your book is very intersectional as well, not that it's specifically concerned with queer and trans issues, as you brought up, but it goes in very different directions, I would say. It doesn't have one sort of strand, but goes little paths that are sometimes confusing in a productive sense. I would say that where chapter by chapter or idea, poem by poem, you interrogate the idea of whiteness and the construction of whiteness. Adding to what you just said, I would like to ask, it is an act of, you just basically described it, an act of empowerment, but also an act that needs a lot of power from your side to start a conversation. We talked about, the conversation as performance, if you will, like deliberately talking to certain people about a certain issue that also concerns you, basically implying that they have never thought about what you're asking them, it has to be said, with the discussion we had before. And going away from that, the book in itself is a conversation. There is the question of, do you always have to have that conversation? Do you sometimes think, I wish someone else started these conversations? Is it always me now that, you're deliberately going back to the construction of blackness? You quote Frantz Fanon and you say, like, we need to talk about the construction of whiteness, but does it have to be my job? Because you make it very clear in the beginning of your book or throughout the book that white people mostly don't ever think about their whiteness and their privilege and anything that is connected to that. You know what I mean? Like a lot of my black friends and activists, I say just like, I'm so sick and tired of having to be the person to start the conversation, but you do it, and you don't do it in an angry or like passionately political way, but in a very smooth and complicated way. And I want to ask you about that.
Well, I wanted it to be integrated. I mean, that's conscious because it doesn't have to, it's not a fight, it's life. And I wanted it to be an integrated conversation that is as natural as talking about my beautiful shoes. Because it is part of my beautiful life. And so that's a very conscious thing. I had a student last spring, and they had just transitioned, and we did trans poetics in my class, and everybody had to do a presentation, and when they had their presentation, they gave the class the reading and said, this reading is about trans poetics, but I'm not going to say anything. You all need to read and you have the conversation, which I thought was a great moment, and the rest of the class was fantastic. They were like, okay, we're in. And so the conversation was generated with those questions, but they didn't have to answer them. It was, the reading was supposed to help the class come up with their own answers. So I think people are beginning to understand that they don't have to sit in the position of the educator of people who have chosen not to educate themselves. I'm interested in conversation. I'm interested in people. I want to have conversations with people. I'm interested in what people think. I'm interested in my own blind spots, the limits to my own knowing. So if you want to have a conversation, I'm in. But I'm also trying to be responsible to the history and the feelings that I have in the moment of those conversations.
One of the strategies that you also already alluded to is like to talk to people, but give them a transcript of the conversations and comment on it. Maybe you can say something about this. How many of the people that you're quoting got to read this? And then maybe, on your final page, you say that you actually talked to a psychiatrist about the entire book and wanted to have her feedback, but it's a very interesting response system that you integrate into your work.
Well, the way the conversations arrived in Just Us, I didn't know. The first one I went after, the talking to white men on planes, I decided I was going to do that. All of the other ones just happened. A month, 2 months would pass, and then I would go with a friend to see a play, and in the play says, white people, go on stage. Give black people, the audience, space for once in their life. Get out. Let them have this. for the time, the 5 minutes at the end of the play. And the white woman that I went with refused to get up. And I found myself just getting enraged. Like, why won't she get up? And so that process of seeing myself getting angrier and angrier as I sat in that theater was interesting to me. And I, in the essay, I say the things I said to her, which, you know, were not kind. And so I wrote down what happened, what I said, what she said, and I had gotten a psychoanalyst for this book. So every time I wrote an essay, I brought it to the analyst, and we sat, I read her the essay, because she said if she had to read it beforehand, I would have to pay for 2 sessions. So I was like, no. So I read it, I would read her the essay, and then we would talk about why I felt and said and was moved in the ways that I was moved. We can't account for the other person, but why was I so upset? Why did I say that? What was going on in my own head, heart, body? And then I went back to the essay and I incorporated that discussion in the essay. So some of the reflections on my behavior came out of that. Then I took the essay and I gave it to the person I had the conversation with. I said, is this what happened between us? No one ever said, no, I didn't say that, you're making things up. Everybody said, this is what happened, but, but it's not what I intended. Like, you can't tell me. So and that led to me saying, well, if I am misreading what you intended, so they said I said what you say I said. So I said, why don't you write a response? And I will attach that response to the end of the essay. Whatever you write, I will not change it. I will not trim it. I will put it at the end of the essay. And a few of the people, like the guy on the plane and the woman in the theater, they wrote responses, and those responses are in the books. Other friends were like, no, it's fine. I'm not writing anything more. And then the essay went to a fact checker. And that's where some of the verso, the fact checker was like, you know, Claudia, you said 68% of white men voted for Trump. It was actually 72 or 65. So that got changed in on the recto side, He also, the fact checker, was able to walk back events. So one of the pieces, when I went to school, to college, there was a cross burning. And I would not have known how to do this, but the fact checker was able to look up the 2 students who were persons of interest in the cross burning, because he got the police files from the cross burning, which was back in the 1980s. And both men, both white men, are now judges in the court system. One is a Supreme Court judge in New York. I'm not supposed to say these things, okay. But, which is why that their roles are not in the book. But that is interesting, that they went from being suspected of cross-burning to holding positions of judge, and he was able to track those kinds of things. So he got me those files. And then a lawyer went through, sociologist read through, and that's how, in part, the book got built.
I want to ask 2,000 more questions, but I also, like, we were running out of time. I'm
Sorry.
going to give you, no. I want to give you the chance as well. I just want to read 2 quotes of you that have to do with the idea of conversations. One is just like a general question on page 223. Are conversations desire projected? Is conversing a dance, the back and forth a chance to take or to be taken away, taken out? I found that such a beautiful comment in the forms of questions, of like questioning what a conversation is, and to maybe parallel that with a conversation you had with a white friend. Also to mark that, as you said, I think like painful experiences are included in this book. You asked something that I think a lot of white and black people have asked themselves sometimes when it's about race. You can't see racism if you can't see race, is how do we keep all the differences on the table and still call that a friendship? You write about your friend. Can you say something about this conflict, if it is one, to on the one hand like try to solve things with conversing, and on the other hand, sometimes think that if you don't see what I have to see or what I'm seeing or what I'm making you see, how do we still call that a friendship?
Well, I think I have friends who I have differences with, and we have maintained our friendship. The quality might be different, but we maintain. And we maintain partly because we value the vulnerability and the truth of the other person. And I think in those friendships, and I'm thinking of a few right now, it's not that we come to agreement, but we come to places where we're willing to sit in okay. Mm-hmm. In that place, in the okay place. And then what happens is we're constantly revisiting that place. It's coming up again. Like I have a friend who I said to them, you're racist, and your parents were racist. And it wasn't like you're racist in particular. You're racist because you're white. And you've come out of a system where racism was part of the structure. And your parents came out of that, and you're part of that. And the person said to me, no, that isn't, my parents are the most liberal, the best people in the world. How dare you say that? That is not true. I'm like, whatever. Whatever. If you want to believe that, believe that. A year later, right after Christmas, I get a phone call from this person. And she tells me this story. She says, the father is a professor, full professor at a well-known university. And they're at home, post-Christmas, watching a television show about Henrietta Lacks. She's the black woman who was experimented on by the doctor and everything. And friends come to the house, family members, cousins or somebody, and they knock on the door, and they come in, and the family's watching the show on how Henrietta Lacks was basically used as a non-person. And the cousin says, what are you watching? And the father says, oh, some show about an ignorant black woman who doesn't understand science. And my friend called me up and she said, I was floored. So that is why she's my friend. It took her a year to arrive at that moment, but when she arrived at that moment, it wasn't covered up. It was, she finally saw the things she had not been able to see up until then. that the narratives are being given over and over and over again.
Thank you very much. Last round of questions or comments from your side. Don't be shy. Make yourself visible. Second row. My dear colleague, can you pass the microphone? Maybe others who are interested can raise their arms now too, so that I don't overwatch anyone. No?
Overwatch or overlook?
Hi.
What does overwatch mean?
I don't know, overlook.
That's not a word. It's not my native tongue.
Overlook. I think.
Overlook, yeah, thanks.
Good
Question here.
evening. Thank you so much for your talk. One of my good friends, Iren, is a co-captain of Wave Run Collective, which is a running group in Berlin geared towards creating visibility for queer, black, and brown runners. And she sent me a link to your article, which I read many years ago, that you wrote on Serena Williams. And I wanted to ask you what you think of that article in retrospect, given Serena's retirement from tennis and sort of the fanfare or the lack of fanfare, given what she's done not only for the sport of tennis, but also for culture in general. Yeah, sorry.
Can you quickly elaborate on what the article is? Serena
It was
Williams?
a New York Times feature on Serena Williams, I think 2015. I think I read it in 2015, yeah. And
Yeah. Thank you for that question. You know, a lot of people called me up when Serena was going to retire, and I didn't respond because I feel like other people should respond. I said what I had to say about that, which wasn't really about Serena. It was about how she was treated. You know, when we began with the idea of, am I an activist? And I wouldn't say I was an activist, but that article in the New York Times about how Serena was treated on the court and in the media changed the way people wrote about Serena. And so that, for me, was one of my most proud moments, because I actually could see the influence a piece of writing had on subsequent pieces of writing. And at the beginning, people would quote me. They would say, Claudia Rankine, blah, 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 and then they would write. And then eventually they stopped quoting me, but they didn't stop seeing what had been pointed out in the original article. And that was perfect. It was like, it doesn't need to pass through me. You should be seeing it yourself. And so I feel that when I watched Serena in those last matches, like in the one where she lost to Naomi Osaka, and the audience was so behind Serena, I feel like that was a great moment. That's how far we've gotten. And now she can evolve, as she says, into doing something else with a full career where the trials and tribulations that she had to be better than everybody and hold all the wounds and still win. You know, I was reading today a lot of stuff about, this is called Procrastination 101, but a lot of stuff about Roger Federer retiring and how graceful Roger Federer is and how, the language is like luxuriating in Roger Federer as James Bond. It's like the man can do no wrong. Roger Federer is a fantastic player, tennis player, and it is true that he handled, they like to say this, but he handled himself on court without any rancor. But he didn't have to have any rancor. And that's the part they don't say. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but I remember once reading that Wimbledon gave Roger Federer the check before he won and then he lost, and they had to get it back. I don't know if it's true. But that's the thing. Roger Federer he is incredibly talented, an amazing tennis player, and beloved. Serena did not have that. She's incredibly talented, an amazing tennis player, and resented for being those very things. So it's just interesting to see the different ways in which they're written about and talked about.
Are there final questions or comments from your side? Maybe. There will be a signing of your work here on this very table, I think, after this.
Oh.
Let me, we're running out of time. I mean, this conversation will go on in our heads, I think, and in our minds, and with other people. Our conversation, I think, has to end at one point. I was just want to bring this, your book is called Just Us, an American Conversation. It's not like this hasn't happened in Germany as well, also by authors like Alice Hasters. That I just want to tell you the title of the book that she wrote that might be comparable. It's what white people don't want to hear about racism but need to know. And that's a title that, you know, comparing it to a conversation has a very different tone to it and maybe a different form of activism or urgency. Would you also write a book that is called something like that? Would you be so specific, or do you specifically maybe think that? Sorry, there are some flies on this stage. Feel like
The
I'm
reality.
The devil there, like flies. Yes, like the devil.
Yeah, it's like,
"Ugh."
what's going on?
Would you also like be more specific in that, or is it, you know, would you write a book that is called like that?
No, I don't think I would. Partly because there are two, you know, Saidiya Hartman has said the enterprise of educating white people has failed. And a little bit I agree with that. It's not, and it's not about educating anybody, it's about, my position as a writer is more from the positionality of, this is the experience that I'm having. I want to see it, I want to look at it, I want to think about it, I want to share it. What you do, I have no illusion about having any power over what anybody else can do. I don't even know what I'm going to do tomorrow. So that is not something I could honestly step into as a project. But I am interested in affect, feeling, how things are encountered, what the texture of that is, how long the resonances last, how the history is impacted, all of that. And I'm interested in conversations, I'm realizing. Like, what is it to, you know, to quote myself, you know, why are we here if not for each other? Like, what the fuck are we doing here? Thinking. About what? You know, really, about what? What are we thinking about? Are we thinking about what we're going to give our kids, what we're going to leave for our kids, what we are going to take with us? What, you know, part of what's happening, I have a feeling right now with the rise of white supremacy, it's always been there, but it's inflamed at this moment across the world, not just in the United States. And I think we don't talk enough about the relationship of the emotional panic of climate change as it's tied to the desire to hold on to what people think is theirs. You know, like that things are being upended in terms of viruses, climate, everything. We have no idea what's going to happen next. And so consequently, somebody needs to suffer more. to make us feel better.
It's a very hard closing statement. I had one great moment where you say we just need to talk with each other, and now we're
And we can talk about that.
and we can talk about that. Tell me more, I think, or tell me what's the last word of your book. I wrote it down. You tell me something. Tell me something is more or less the end of this book, and maybe let's leave it there and we tell each other, we continue telling each other a lot of things and waiting for you to write a new marvelous, or create a new marvelous art piece or think piece like Just Us, an American Conversation. Thank you so much, everyone in the audience right now watching from online, and for your generosity and your brilliant thought. Claudia Rankine.
Thank you. Oh, I think I left my book outside or in the office. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to leave you here.